If you are listening to this right now, your body is managing a continuous massive recycling program.
It really is. We're talking about protein turnover.
Daily, something like 1 to 2% of your body's total protein is broken down and, well, replaced.
And that constant breakdown process is, it's essential for life, but it immediately generates a critical cleanup job.
Okay, what's the job?
Well, when you dismantle amino acids, you free the nitrogen they contain. This nitrogen very quickly becomes ammonia, NH3, which, for the human body, and especially for your central nervous system, is highly toxic.
So our mission today is to follow that toxic nitrogen atom. We're going to trace its journey from a component of, some random cellular protein.
Right, through several ingenious detoxification steps.
And ultimately to its non-toxic excretion as urea. We are diving deep into a process that is quite literally a matter of life or death.
That's the core insight here. This isn't just an academic pathway. The tight regulation of this system is absolutely vital. If the liver, the main detoxification center, is compromised by disease like cirrhosis or hepatitis, blood ammonia levels rise rapidly. You get hyperammonemia.
And you see the consequences almost immediately.
Immediately. Lethargy, neurological damage, severe clinical signs. So understanding this pathway explains why defects here are so devastating.
Okay, let's unpack this in 3 parts for you. We'll first look at the demolition crew, how the cell flags and destroys proteins using half-lives and molecular tags.
Then we'll trace the incredible collection and transport system, the funnel that gathers all that nitrogen.
And finally, we'll meticulously follow the 5 steps of the urea cycle, linking this detoxification engine to the disorders that come up when it stalls. Let's begin with the initial demolition. Protein turnover and degradation pathways. What I find so striking is that not all proteins are treated equally.
Not at all.
The cell has a way of assigning different expiration dates.
Absolutely. We quantify that using the concept of half-life, or TWT1/2. Housekeeping enzymes, the ones you always need for basic stuff like glycolysis, are very stable. Their half-lives can be well over 100 hours.
They just stick around because they're always needed.
Exactly. But then you have regulatory enzymes,
Right.
the ones that act as molecular switches for key processes.
So the cell needs to be able to destroy those really fast to turn a process off.
Precisely. Their half-lives can be as short as 30 minutes to 2 hours.
And there are specific signals for that, right? These PS sequences.
That's right. Many of those short-lived proteins contain what we call PS sequences, regions rich in proline, glutamate, serine, and threonine that serve as a flag, degrade me quickly.
So how does the actual destruction happen? We have 2 main roads, correct?
That's right. First, there's the lysosomal pathway, which importantly doesn't require ATP or chemical energy.
Okay.
A great example is with glycoproteins circulating in the blood. If these molecules lose a specific sugar called sialic acid, they become, well, they're called acetylglycoproteins.
So a slightly damaged version.
A slightly damaged version. And liver receptors recognize that change, internalize the whole molecule, and the proteases inside the lysosomes just break them down. It's an internal cleanup system.
But the more complex and frankly more interesting system is the ATP-dependent one. And this one relies on a tiny molecule, ubiquitin.
Ubiquitin is fascinating. It's a small protein, just 76 residues, and it is found in virtually all eukaryotic organisms, from yeast all the way to you.
And it's highly conserved, isn't it?
Incredibly. When we look at its structure, only 3 of those 76 residues are different between yeast and humans.
Wow.
That level of evolutionary conservation tells you that this system is absolutely fundamental to complex life.
And this requires a very structured tagging mechanism that uses energy. It's a 3-step enzymatic chain, the E1, E2, E3 system. Can you walk us through that tag without us getting lost in the names?
Certainly. Think of it like a molecular security tag system. The E1 enzyme activates the tag.
Okay, gets right.
The E2 enzyme acts as a transfer vehicle, and then the E3 enzyme is the final ligase. It's the one that recognizes the specific target protein and locks the ubiquitin tag onto it.
And it attaches to a specific spot.
It does, specifically onto lysyl residues on the protein's surface.
And for the protein to actually be destroyed, it needs more than one tag.
Usually, yes. For soluble proteins, they need to be polyubiquitinated.
Meaning 4 or more ubiquitin tags attached in a chain.
That's right. Typically linked via a specific lysine, lysine 48. This polyubiquitin chain is the specific death sentence.
And where is the sentence carried out? That brings us to the proteasome. I think of this thing as the cellular equivalent of a secure cylindrical paper shredder.
That is a great analogy. It's a massive cylindrical structure found throughout the cell. Inside the cylinder are the proteolytic active sites, the blades.
But what makes it so secure?
It's the outer ring, which acts as a gated pore. It only allows entry to proteins that are wearing that specific polyubiquitin chain. Once inside, the protein is unwound and just degraded into small peptides.
That's incredible quality control. And I know the sources highlight that if this control mechanism breaks down, if you have genetic defects in the E3 lyacases, the consequences are immediate and severe. Things like Angelman syndrome or certain forms of juvenile Parkinson disease.
Really shows how crucial this regulated demolition is for preventing disease.
Okay, so proteins are broken down. Now we have this pool of free amino acids.
And we've emphasized that free amino acids are not stored. The carbon skeletons get saved for energy or synthesis, but that nitrogen, it has to be dealt with immediately.
Which brings us to what you called the nitrogen funnel. All the diverse alpha amino nitrogen atoms from dozens of different amino acids are somehow collected and concentrated into one single molecule,
L-glutamate.
L-glutamate.
That concentration happens via transamination. This is the first critical step. Aminotransferases take the alpha amino nitrogen from most amino acids and transfer it to alpha-ketoglutarate.
And the result of that transfer is glutamate.
Yes, and it requires a coenzyme, pyridoxal phosphate, or PLP, which is derived from vitamin B6. PLP acts as a temporary carrier, shuttling that amino group during the reaction.
So glutamate becomes the main molecular hub for all the incoming nitrogen. Once it's all concentrated there, the cell needs to release it as ammonia to start the detox process.
That release is done by oxidative deamination. It occurs primarily in the liver, catalyzed by L-glutamate dehydrogenase, or GDH.
And this is a key point for anyone studying this. Glutamate is practically the only amino acid that undergoes deamination at an appreciable rate in our tissues to release free ammonia.
That's the critical takeaway. It's the choke point for nitrogen release.
And the regulation of this enzyme, GDH, is absolutely brilliant because it ties nitrogen disposal directly to the body's energy needs.
Precisely. If the cell has high energy lots of ATP, GDP NADH-GDH is inhibited. The cell is signaling energy levels are good, don't break down amino acids for fuel.
Right, conserve the nitrogen.
But if the energy charge drops and you have lots of ADP, GDH is activated. It's brilliant control. Only generate the toxic waste when you absolutely need the carbon skeletons for energy.
Let's just pause on the toxicity again. We've said ammonia is devastating to the brain. If NH3 is circulating, what is the specific mechanism that causes brain damage?
Well, the primary mechanism is that ammonia reacts directly with alpha-ketoglutarate in the brain to form more glutamate.
Okay.
And while glutamate is an amino acid, this reaction depletes the brain's pool of alpha-ketoglutarate, which is a vital intermediate for the neuronal TCA cycle.
You're starving the brain's power grid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're robbing the TCA cycle of a necessary component, you impair energy generation, and that leads immediately to severe neurological symptoms.
So to avoid that lethal scenario, the body can't just send free ammonia to the liver. It needs a safe way to package it up and transport it.
It does. It converts that toxic NH3 into the non-toxic amino acid glutamine. Tissues use an enzyme called glutamine synthetase. It's an ATP-coupled reaction to fix the ammonia.
And glutamine, being non-toxic, is the perfect, safe courier molecule.
It is, and the sources beautifully summarize this interorgan exchange. Glutamine, along with another amino acid, alanine, are the primary transport vehicles.
Right.
Muscle tissue, which is constantly breaking down protein, releases large amounts of both alanine and glutamine. The liver then picks up alanine and converts it back to glucose.
The glucose-alanine cycle.
That's the one. It's a great way to ship nitrogen and fuel to the liver for processing.
And we can't forget the kidney's role here, which goes beyond just detoxification.
The kidney's function in acid-base balance is unique. When the body experiences metabolic acidosis, the kidney dramatically increases its production of ammonia from glutamine.
Why?
This ammonia is then excreted in the urine, which allows the body to conserve essential taciences, like sodium, and that helps restore the acid-base balance. So glutamine serves multiple life-saving purposes.
We've seen glutamine carry the toxic nitrogen safely to the liver. Now, what does the liver do with it? This is the grand finale, the urea cycle, the definitive detoxification engine.
The basic math is pretty simple. 2 nitrogen atoms, one from ammonia, one from aspartate, and 1 carbon atom from CO2 are combined into a single molecule of urea. This whole thing costs 3 ATP molecules.
And it's a highly organized hybrid pathway?
It is. The first 2 reactions happen inside the mitochondrial matrix, and the final 3 steps happen out in the cytosol. So you need specialized transport proteins to shuttle things back and forth.
Let's follow the nitrogen through the 5 steps, starting with the pacemaker. Step 1 in the matrix. The ammonium ion and CO2 are converted into carbamoyl phosphate.
And this is catalyzed by carbamoyl phosphate synthetase, or CPSI.
This is the big one.
This is the big one. CPSI is the committed rate-limiting enzyme of the whole cycle, and its regulation is critical. It is entirely dependent on its allosteric activator, N-acetylglutamate, or NAG.
So if NAG isn't there, CPSI is off.
Completely off. The concentration of NAG rises when there's a lot of acetyl-CoA and glutamate around, which effectively links the cycle's activity directly to the availability of nitrogen and energy. It ensures the detox engine only runs at full speed when the nitrogen load is high.
And we should clarify, this is CPSI. The body has a separate enzyme, CPS2, in the cytosol for a totally different purpose.
Exactly, for pyrimidine synthesis. CPSI is the dedicated detox starter.
Okay, step 2, still in the matrix.
This is the transfer step. Carbamoyl phosphate reacts with ornithine to form citrulline, catalyzed by ornithine transcarbamylase, or OTC. The citrulline is then shuttled out to the cytosol.
Moving out to the cytosol, step 3 incorporates the second nitrogen atom.
Right. Citrulline combines with aspartate to form arginosuccinate. This reaction requires ATP, and aspartate is the specific donor for that second nitrogen in the final urea molecule.
Then in step 4, that arginosuccinate is split.
It is, by arginosuccinate lyase. It produces two molecules, arginine and fumarate. And the release of fumarate here is a perfect example of metabolic efficiency.
Wait, so the body isn't just disposing of waste, it's actively recovering energy metabolites at the same time.
Yes, that fumarate is instantly useful. It links the urea cycle directly back into the TCA cycle,
Where it can be converted to malate, then oxaloacetate.
which is then immediately transaminated back to aspartate to restart the process. It's this elegant resource recovery loop that minimizes waste.
And finally, step 5 completes the circuit.
Arginase in the liver performs the final split. It hydrolytically cleaves arginine, which releases the finished, non-toxic product, urea,
And regenerates the starting molecule.
ornithine, which then rushes back into the mitochondria to accept the next carbamoyl phosphate. The cycle begins again.
So when this elegant engine stalls because of a defect, the clinical pattern is unfortunately very consistent.
It is, and it's mainly driven by the accumulation of those upstream toxic precursors, especially ammonia and glutamine.
And we see that same profile. Lethargy, vomiting, an aversion to protein, and often severe mental retardation. And the severity really hinges on where the block happens.
Ammonia intoxication is always most devastating when the block is early in the cycle. So a deficiency in CPSI or OTC.
Why is that?
It's because less of the toxic free ammonia has been successfully captured and covalently linked to a larger organic and less toxic molecule like citrulline.
Let's look at some of those key defects. We have CPSI deficiency hyperammonemia type 1 and also NAGS deficiency.
Right, and the sources make a critical distinction here. If the defect is in the AGS enzyme that makes the activator, you might be able to treat it by administering N-acetylglutamate directly, which could kickstart the remaining CPSI.
That's a very specific therapy.
It is. Then we have ornithine transcarbamylase, or OTC, deficiency. This is hyperammonemia type 2, and it's unique because it's X chromosome linked.
So it's more common and severe in males.
Yes. And a frequent, if sometimes subtle, indicator is that the mothers carrying the gene often show a hyperammonemia and protein aversion themselves.
Another unique one is the defect in arginosuccinate lyase. This causes arginosuccinic aciduria, but it's associated with a very specific physical symptom.
Friable tufted hair, technically known as trichorexis nodosa. It just shows that even a late-stage block can have surprising systemic effects.
And we have to mention transport problems like the ornithine permease defect.
The ORNT1 defect.
Yeah.
Right. If ornithine can't get into the mitochondria, the carbamoyl phosphate inside just accumulates and links up with lysine instead.
Leading to HHH syndrome?
Hyperornithemia, hyperammonemia, and homocystinuria. Exactly.
Given how quickly high ammonia levels cause irreversible damage, early detection is everything.
It's paramount. It usually means a lifelong low-protein diet. Thankfully, technology has given us a powerful diagnostic tool.
Tandem mass spectrometry.
Yes, tandem mass spec, or MS. It's now the technique of choice in newborn screening. It's incredibly sensitive, and it can identify over 40 accumulating metabolites at the same time, allowing doctors to quickly pinpoint exactly which step of the cycle has failed.
So to bring this powerful process to a close, we followed that toxic nitrogen from general protein breakdown through its crucial concentration into glutamate.
It's a safe transit as glutamine and alanine.
And its structured, compartmentalized, final conversion in the urea cycle.
You know, the entire system is really defined by two indispensable principles for survival: Efficiency, by funneling all that nitrogen into glutamate, and safety, by using glutamine for transport and urea for excretion.
And the sheer toxicity of ammonia means that CPSI is far more than just an enzyme.
It's the tightly regulated pacemaker of life-saving detoxification.
And the sources pointed out one fact I really can't stop thinking about. The protein ubiquitin is almost perfectly conserved across billions of years of evolution. Only 3 out of 76 amino acids are different between yeast and humans.
That's amazing.
What does that profound conservation tell us about the absolute fundamental necessity of controlled protein destruction? It truly is the ultimate cellular recycling system, essential for every form of complex life on Earth. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.